Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the DCL Duo podcast, brought to you by My Path Unwinding Travel. And Sam, it's do your jingle time. Do your jingle.
Simply the best, better than all the rest. Gosh, it's been a while since I've sang that.
Yeah, you can tell you're out of tune.
I'm a little rusty.
Yeah, a little rusty.
I need
All
to
right,
do my vocal exercises.
yeah. With that jingle, it is time to read a listener review, and since our guest today is from the UK, but we'll get into whether we'll get into some more detail there. But we thought we would read a listener review from the UK, and so this one comes from Laura Benzi, who writes probably the most consistent DCL podcast out there. Hopefully, it's consistently good. We know it is because she gave us 5 stars. She writes, I've been a longtime listener of the DCL Duo, and I really appreciate their wide range of content on all things DCL. Whether you're an inside stateroom cruiser like me or a Royal Suite concierge cruiser, they have you covered. Brian and Sam are great hosts, and they work wonderfully together. And then there's like a kind of like almost like a blushing happy face, I think it is. I don't know. I don't know the names for all these newfangled emojis that are out there, but thank you, Laura, for your review. We really appreciate it. And for all of you out there listening, especially internationally, we love to hear from our international listeners. It still blows us away that we've got people listening to us outside the U.S. So thank you for leaving the review, Laura. And if you want to help support the show, remember one of the easiest ways to do that, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit those 5 stars. And if you leave us a written review, we will read it on the air at the top of one of our main episodes. Sam, over to you.
Yeah. You know what's funny? We have another Laura from the UK on the show today. How funny.
You know
How
what's
weird
funny, Sam, is that Laura is me.
There we go.
Benzie is my maiden name, which is obviously still attached to my Apple account.
Well, there we go.
Hilarious. Because when he read the name, I was like, could it be this Laura? But no, it's a different. She has a different last name.
Well, it's spelled differently too in the review. It's Lora. So
it's a very old Apple account, clearly.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. So that's a funny coincidence. Okay, well, for those who don't recognize Laura's voice, or if you're watching on YouTube or recognize her face, Laura has actually been on the show several times before. Laura is an avid Disney cruiser, big Disney fan, of course. But we're not actually going to be talking about a Disney cruise today, Laura.
We're getting about as far away from Disney as one can get.
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's not actually that far from Disney cruising, because the Disney ships were actually, for anyone who like sort of follows, history of Disney Cruise Line, the Disney ships were modeled after ships built by Cunard, like the QE2. And Laura traveled across the pond from the UK to the United States on Cunard recently for a cross-Atlantic move. So I gotta, first of all, say welcome back to the show, Laura. You are now in the US.
I am. I am. And I was actually thinking, I think this is my 5th time on the podcast. So does that make me a gold podcast?
Welcome to gold. Yeah, after this. Remember, after you finish your 5th episode, then you become gold. Let's finish this recording.
Mostly because we don't have the stateroom gifts ready, but yes.
Yeah, we don't have the stateroom gifts.
I have recorded with you guys from England every time up until now. But no, I am now sitting at home in the United States.
That's crazy. Okay, so you guys planned a cross-Atlantic move. Now you are a dual citizen, so it's a little bit easier than for somebody who is just trying to, immigrate and you have to do, visas and all that kind of stuff. But tell us, how did you guys decide to do a cross-Atlantic move via ship? Like where did that idea come from? Like, why not fly and just ship your stuff? Like, how did this concept come to be?
Yes. So the main reason that we did this was because of our dog. So she is an Old English Bulldog. Her name is Ruby. She is my child.
I mean,
And
we have 3 children. We have Nathan and we have our 2 dogs, Amos and Isabel, who are they're American Cocker Spaniels, and there are other children, absolutely, I totally understand.
And because of her breed, there are some. She's too big to fly in a cabin, which is an option. Not usually from London, but there are ways around it. I did a lot of research. There are, and most cargo shipments of dogs, they are not keen on her breed because her bulldog breed as a whole tend to have the squashed faces, the breathing
Right,
issues.
the
What
breathing
she does,
issues, yeah.
yeah, so she is an Old English Bulldog. So she gets kind of lumped in with bulldogs as a whole, which have the squashed faces, the breathing problems, etc., even though she actually doesn't. But airlines, the classifications, they don't go down to that level of detail. So it's not easy to get her onto a cargo flight. And from personal preference, that wasn't something that we were that keen on doing anyway. So we were looking at other options. You obviously, I'm sure people are aware of the pet flight companies that charter a small plane with multiple pet owners. That's extremely expensive and was very much out of our budget. And in comes the kennels of the Queen Mary too. So, I'm here. I've been on the show a few times. You guys know how much I love cruising. So the opportunity to take our dog on a cruise and like make that a reality and use that as our way of travel in as part of this big move that we were making just felt like a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a fantastic way to move because, you're gonna have a lot of stuff to bring over when you're making any kind of well, you're making any permanent move, right? Like you have lots of suitcases, right? And so you don't have you have a lot of like limits on what you can bring on flights in general, right? Not of course not including even your dog, but also just like your stuff, right? And you have even if a cruise ship has a limit, it's going to always be higher than the limits that you're going to have on flights. And so it seems like a smart idea. Plus, like I'm curious about the quarantine rules about for the pets, right? Because I know that some countries impose a certain amount of time. I'm wondering if being on the ship for the however many days you guys were on that crossing, like, would that comply with quarantine rules? Or I'm not sure.
It's surprisingly easy to bring a dog from the UK to the US. Actually, to the point where I was convinced that I had missed something. And, the day before the cruise, I'm sat there going, this can't be it. This can't be it. All we actually had to do was she needed full vaccination records, which she already had. According to the CDC website, a rabies vaccination was optional because we were a low risk country. However, I have found that it is expected. So we did do it anyway. I was, it's optional. I'm just going to do it. It was not an expensive thing to get done. And I'm not taking any chances with this.
Well, and a lot of, at least here, like, our county requires the shots in order our city
Yeah,
requires the
and that's
shots to
exactly
license
what we
them.
found since we've been here. They do require it. So, despite the fact that they tell you it's optional, it's not really. I had to fill in a CDC form online, and then she had to have a vet check within 5 days of leaving the UK. And she walked straight off the ship with us and into our waiting vehicle to continue our journey. Yeah, no quarantine needed at all.
Wow. Yeah, some countries have, like you can, like, fly your pet over and then they have to be, like, quarantined for, like, literally, like, 2 weeks and stuff.
I think, yeah, and I think Australia's like, from what I understand, Australia and New Zealand, they are very, very hot on
Very strict, yeah.
lengthy quarantines. But no, I honestly, I was surprised.
Yeah, I have a friend who moved to, New Zealand, a friend of mine from college who moved from New Zealand to from Oregon, and they had a dog, and they actually had to, like their dog had to, like, stay with some friends, then their dog had to be, like, put on a separate plane, and, and then the dog was in a quarantine for, like, I think 2 weeks, like, some kind of, like, I'll call it federal government, but, like, New Zealand's federal government quarantine for, like, 2
Yeah, no,
weeks. It's
I
cra
was honestly
wow.
really, really surprised that it was a lot simpler than I was expecting it to be. it's too simple.
Yeah. Well, well, I wanna get into some of the nitty-gritty of the cruise itself, but I gotta ask, like, where does the dog stay on the ship? Like, is the dog able to is Ruby able to be in your stateroom in a
Wouldn't
kennel, or
that
is
be
she,
the
like
dream?
yeah, or is she, like, or does she have
Honestly,
to be in, like, a
yeah,
kennel
so the Queen
sort
Mary 2 has its own kennel area. You're on deck 12 at the aft of the ship. So right at the top, right at the back, there's a kennel room with, I believe it's 20 kennels. I've read 24, but I think there's 20. I did take a photo, so I could go back and count. There are lower kennels and upper kennels. And if you've ever seen kennels kind of at a vet's, that's what I would kind of equate it to. There's enough space for the dogs to kind of like turn around and have their bed, but that's kind of it. The little dogs go at the top and the bigger dogs go at the bottom, and they do also take cats. Cats have slightly different requirements in that you have to book at least 2 kennels for the cat because they need a litter place and a sleeping place. But yeah, for dogs, I think of a certain, if you got much bigger than Ruby, I think you would be starting to look at booking 2 kennels. But they have all of those requirements, and they will tell you, you have to like measure your dog and send the measurements, and they will tell you what they require you to purchase for the dog.
Now, do they take care of your dog on board, or how, like, does your
To
dog
an
get
extent, yes,
yeah.
but you are very much on the hook for continuing to care and like look after your dog. So there are 2 kennel masters, so a kennel master and assistant kennel master. There is a very very famous kennel master called Oliver, who sadly had just gotten off the ship when we got on, so we did not get to meet him. But we had the assistant kennel master, Neko, was acting then as kennel master, and he had an assistant called Andy. And they were both absolutely lovely. They cared so much for the dogs. So basically, they will clean up after your dog. So anything that happens on the deck where you are walking the dogs, you either shout code yellow or 007, and they come and collect or clean, and they also will feed the dogs. Um, and if for any reason you can't get up to the kennels during the visiting hours or like immediately in the morning or whatever, if you ask them, they will take the dogs out. Or in some cases, if certain owners just didn't come, they would get the dog out to allow it to do its business. But they're not going to keep that dog kind of out and about. So, really, if you want your dog out of your kennel, which I'm sure most people do, you need to be up there during the visiting hours. And there are kind of there's a smaller room and a slightly larger room where you can sit with the dogs during that time. And then there's a small deck area outdoors, which is basically just a walkway around the aft of the ship, a little like U-shaped area where you can walk them up and down. For 1 hour in the evening, you get a slightly larger place on deck 12, which my husband and I looked like crazy people running up and down with Ruby, taking turns because she's a bigger dog. She needs a decent amount of exercise. She'll easily run 4 or 5 kilometers with my husband. So not being allowed to run around was a little rough for her. So we did our best to kind of keep her moving when we had that extra space.
Yeah. Well, so that means you can't take your dog like anywhere on the ship, like at your stateroom and other places. You're limited. Yeah, you're limited. So, but well, it's a really, I mean, it's a really cool thing because most cruise ships you can't take dogs at all unless it's a service dog, right? Like on Disney Cruise Line, for example. All right. Well, we got to talk about Cunard and the ways in which it's different from Disney Cruise Line, of course.
Hey, Sam, can we start with I just kind of like to start with the ship since we started there. Like, how big is this ship that we're talking about? And like, give us a sense of like the layout as compared to maybe like a Disney
So the
cruise.
Queen Mary 2, my understanding is it's the world's only ocean liner. So it's technically not a cruise ship. I think the biggest thing that we learned about that made the difference there is that it has additional stabilizers, and the layout is very different. So all of the kind of main amenities of the ship are down on deck 2 and 3. There's a buffet and some restaurants on deck 7, but most of the time the things that you're doing, the main restaurant that we were in, kind of pubs and bars, those sorts of areas, a lot of the shopping, all on deck 2 and 3. So it's all placed very much lower down. The theatre as well, down, I think, yeah, that was across, it was either across 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, if I remember correctly. I believe it has about 2,700 passengers, but I would say it felt kind of dream fantasy size to me. It was a decent walk from one end of the ship to the other, so it's definitely bigger than the Magic and the Wonder. But yeah, I would have said in the region of the dream and the fantasy, but with fewer people. They just don't have as many people on board, so it feels a lot emptier. You definitely don't have kids soup in the pools.
Yeah. I mean, that's, like, close to half the actually, I think it is about half the passenger count at a full capacity kinda dream class sailing, or at least a wish class sailing. What's the does that mean you get more room in, like, a stateroom, or, like, where did you see that extra space going?
So I think there was just a lot more. I think the rooms were, excuse me, the staterooms were probably bigger. We were in an inside stateroom though, and I would say that felt smaller. So we would usually cruise in an inside stateroom with a split bathroom on Disney. I Our room was definitely smaller than that category of stateroom on Disney. That being said, we picked the cheapest room. This trip served a purpose, and we were not spending money. We knew we wouldn't be in kind of enjoying the room, so to speak. So we did pick the cheapest room that we could get. I did miss the split bathroom though. That did make a difference.
Yeah, for those listening, not every inside stateroom on Disney has the split bathroom, so you have to actually be real choosy. A lot of the inside staterooms don't, and I think on the Wish class, I don't know that any of the inside staterooms have the split bathroom. I'm not positive on that, but the ones I've toured did not. I toured a whole bunch of inside staterooms on the Disney Destiny, which is of course the same as the Treasure and the Wish in layout, and none of the ones that I toured on the preview sailing had a split bathroom, so I'm yeah. But anyway, just something to look out for, but yeah, we love the split bathroom for sure. It just makes for getting ready a lot easier. I'd love to know, you mentioned amenities on the ship, but I'd love to know, like, do they have similar amenities? Like, you mentioned theater, but what about, like, spa and other, like, entertainment spaces, that sort of a thing?
Yes, yes. So spa, they had a planetarium listed, which I think also doubles as a cinema. We did not make it there. I am not entirely sure what that entailed, but I believe they also used it as a small theater as well. During our sailing, they had a small 5-person theater company on board that did a couple of small shows, and they were not in the main stage theatre. They were in this smaller area. Yes, I believe, and they also put the cinema is also in there. Lots of shopping, lots of luxury shopping too. There was a resale designer bag shop, which is something I've personally not seen before on a ship anyway. And then all your kind of classic jewelry, watches, a good amount of space dedicated to that, multiple bars, the Golden Lion pub. So that classic British pub situation that lots of cruise ships tend to have.
I was gonna say, if anyone can do a pub, it would have to be Cunard, so, I'm assuming it was a fairly fairly faithful recreation to a British pub.
Yes. And then there was, so right up the front on deck 7, there was a martini bar. There was other kind of cocktail bars. We didn't actually go, I forget what it's called. There was a bar opposite, there was a bar called the Chart Room that we quite liked. There was a champagne bar, and there was another bar area opposite that with a different theme. And we didn't really venture into there, so I'm not entirely sure what it was. And I'm trying to go through the rest of the layout in my head. That, yes, I think I said they did have a spa. That looked pretty big. We didn't go in. They had a very, very big gym for a cruise ship, certainly in my experience. It was very decently sized, a full side of it dedicated to cardio and a full side of it dedicated to weights, even with a barbell and a rack set up, which is something I don't think I've seen on a ship before, and kind of from a stability perspective did feel a little bit unstable. So that was definitely an interesting one to try out.
Yeah. What about on board? Well, actually, let's talk eating first. You mentioned a buffet and restaurants. Tell us, like, what was the like? Are these like sort of formal sit down? Is there any quick serve options beyond the buffet? But yeah, what was the food situation like?
So actually the restaurant that you eat in every night, if you go to sit down dinner or sit down lunch even and I think actually all of them, that restaurant is assigned based on your stateroom class, so to speak. So us being in the cheaper rooms, we were assigned to the Britannia restaurant. If you're in a suite, which I believe they call grills suites, you would eat in either the Queen's Grill or the Princess Grill restaurants, and they would be your assigned restaurants.
This is reminding me of the Titanic with the steerage
Oh,
class
very
and
much, yes. And I
the
joked several times with my husband that we're in steerage. Um, that being said, although it was for the lower classes of room, so to speak, it was very grand and very beautiful and still had waiters dressed to the nines. And, for dinner, after 6 p.m., if you wanted to be in any of the bars and restaurants, you did have to dress appropriately. So
Yeah,
no
what does that
short
mean? Yeah.
so yeah, and we did have to, there was a sign and it said for men, basically like collared shirts, no jeans, closed toed shoes. For women, again, no jeans, no shorts, like kind of nicely dressed, so to speak. Certainly not kind of, you wouldn't see the variety that you get on Disney. But there was still definitely a variety within that smartly dressed kind of place. From, my husband had a collared shirt and cargo trousers. No, that's like khaki pants. So he just wore those. He did have a tie for the more. They did have a couple of formal nights, so he did get dressed up in his tux for those. But then there were people in kind of suit, jacket, tie, everything every night too. And there was definitely more of the like. There was a range within being dressed up, but everybody was definitely dressed up, and you did feel out of place if you were not dressed up. If you did not wish to dress up, you could eat in the buffet, and that was your option.
Yeah, but then you couldn't go to the bar spaces if you weren't dressed up?
Really, no. I believe the pub was acceptable to not be smartly dressed.
Yeah, so, like, you could wear jeans to the buffet and then go to the pub.
Yeah, so if you wanted to have and you could go to the theatre not dressed up as well. They did not require you to dress for the theatre. But yeah, if you wanted to go into pretty much any of the cocktail bars, the champagne bar, the actual sit down restaurants, then yes, you would need to dress appropriately.
Interesting. Were there any children on board? I gotta ask. Like, I
There
know
was
that they
some. It was
yeah,
very, very few. I think they did have kids clubs, but the little groups of kids that you would see with the counselors running around, there were maybe like 6 or 8 kids in that little kind of club. There were a few more. We certainly saw some teenagers, and we met some other people that were moving but continuing on with the ship further. So something that was a little interesting about this particular voyage was that it was this first leg of a world cruise. So everybody who is doing the world cruise, that began the world cruise with us in Southampton and is continuing all the way around, will get back to Southampton at the end of April. So for context, we left the 11th of January. So some people are staying on for a significant amount of time. It's going round to Australia and New Zealand, and we met another family who were moving to Australia, and they're just traveling by ship with the whole family.
that's so cool. Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean, it's a cool idea, obviously, to do a world cruise. We've covered on our show, Royal's world cruise that was a 9-month cruise, but even a 3-month cruise, that I mean, that travels pretty far for just 3 months. That's pretty amazing. So across from Southampton to New York, and then I guess down around through the Panama Canal, I guess,
Panama
and
Canal.
then
First
across the
time that the
Pacific?
Queen Mary 2 has gone through the Panama Canal, so that was another big deal. that was happening. It went round to San Francisco, LA, and I believe in San Francisco, I could be wrong on this location, but wherever the Queen Mary is, that's now a hotel, the ships were meeting again for the first time. So that was, I did see that on social media maybe last week or so.
That's so cool. I think it's in or near LA, I can't remember. Brian, you know where
Yeah, it must
the
be. Yeah, it
Yeah,
must be.
it's
Yeah.
yeah,
And they were
it's
doing an
it's at, like,
overnight
the
in LA. So yeah.
yeah.
it's Queen Mary 2, I think, is permanently
Well, the
or
Queen Mary, not the Queen
Queen
Mary
Mary
2.
is permanently docked, I
Yeah,
think, at Long Beach.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they did make, there was, quite some excitement about that, and people organizing tours to go. There was knowing that the Queen Mary 2 was coming in, the Queen Mary was offering tours and things to coincide with that. And then yeah, I believe it carries on, goes across to Hawaii, over to the Pacific. I think some of the Pacific islands that Disney does on their Trans-Pacific, down to obviously Australia and New Zealand, and then there's South Africa, Namibia, I believe Indonesia. Like there's a whole load of places that they are going all around there. So yeah, I'm not going to claim to know the whole itinerary
Yeah,
though.
yeah. No, that is just, like, such I mean, it's just pretty amazing. I would love to I mean, we would love to do it doesn't work in our schedules or in our budget, but, like, someday, Brian and I dream of doing a world cruise, and frankly, I feel like Cunard would be a great option to do it on because you are in a smaller number of passenger ship, although obviously Royal picked one of their smaller ships to do it as well. But yeah, I just think it would be
It's
it's just a
definitely on the bucket
fascinating.
list for me. It just sounds like such a cool experience. One thing I did find really interesting though was we met people that had got on the ship in New York, come from New York to Southampton, and just stayed on board to go back again. And so basically just did two back-to-back transatlantic crossings. And to me, that's not super appealing. Like I was like, you get one day to seeing, like you can't really make it all that far from Southampton and get back in time to leave. But yeah, we met some people that they were just enjoying the ship for 2 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, that seems weird because you wouldn't even really have time if you're only in Southampton for a day, you don't really even have time to go into London. I mean, it's a couple
Yes,
hours
they made
away.
it to Winchester to see the cathedral. That was as far as they went. So yeah, there was all sorts of people doing all sorts of different itineraries, and it was so awesome to speak to so many different people about, oh, how far are you going? Like, oh, where have you come from? I did meet one woman doing the world cruise, and she had been on board. She had done, I believe, Southampton to New York, and then they did some Caribbean stuff over Christmas, and then come back to Southampton, and then we're staying on for the whole world cruise. So she was doing like November through April or something like that. And I was like, wow.
That's amazing. Now, did you guys stop in, like, the Azores in Portugal or
We did
anything,
not
or
have
did you
a
just
single stop on this trip. It was straight through 8 days. It should have been 7 days. We booked on opening day, knowing that kennel spaces can be difficult to get hold of. I say this, there were two families on the ship who booked the week before. So I have a suspicion that people jump on it like we did. But when it comes to actually kind of finalizing things, and I think with that sort of arrangement, like it gets booked up on day one, with from a kennel perspective, certainly. But then I think the waiting lists can come through. Couldn't tell you how long those waiting lists are that get cycled through, but there were definitely people. We left on the 11th, and there were people that said they got confirmed on the 7th. So, which was like the last possible day to like confirm the dog, I suppose. So, yeah, there were no stops, and it should have been. So, like I said, sorry, we booked on day one, and we were ready for it to be released, waiting, like knowing what we needed. And it was a 7-night itinerary when we booked it. They couldn't actually get their, I guess, dock time or space, whatever they needed in Brooklyn on the day, the 18th, that we were supposed to arrive. So we got an extra day on board for that reason. And because we'd booked beforehand, they did not charge us any extra, but I imagine that the price may have gone up for people who booked 8 days rather than 7.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, I mean, it's just a crazy I mean, to You know, to think that you just add on another sea day when you're yeah, because you don't have your dock space. It's like it's kind of nutty. But I gotta ask, like, what stuff did you guys end up doing on board? Obviously, I know you're gonna spend a lot of time, taking care of Ruby because, she was the sort of the reason for booking this.
She's the
Um,
priority here. Yeah,
yeah, she's
it's
the
as much as
priority.
we wanted to have, a bit of downtime and a little bit of a holiday, it certainly wasn't the same type of cruise as we are used to having from a relaxation and enjoyment perspective. That being said, we found a bit of a routine. So the kennels have set visiting hours every day that you are allowed to be there, and there are set hours where they say, okay, guys, we're at the end now, dogs need to go away. So those hours were from 8 a.m. to midday, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., and 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And that 7:30 to 8:30 window was when we got the little bit of extra deck space to run around. So that one was super important to us. So what we would do is we would tend to wake up in the morning, go and grab breakfast in the buffet, and go straight up to Ruby and get her out as soon as she was allowed out at 8 o'clock. They would have already have been in and given the dogs breakfast at that point. For most of them, there were some people that said they would prefer to feed their dogs, be present, whatever. We were like, she's not bothered by food, just give her breakfast, it's fine. So by the time we got there, she was ready to come out, use the bathroom, say good morning to us, and we would just walk her kind of up and down that little U shape of deck that we had. And then, kind of depending on the weather, if it was good weather, we might kind of spend a little bit of time outside with her, just getting some fresh air. Some of the days it was rainy and cold, disgusting, and she was like, "Get me back inside, parents." So then they had two areas that you could sit in the kennels. So one was a slightly smaller room, and then there was one slightly larger room. We would try to get a spot in the larger room just with Ruby's kind of personality. Like, it was difficult for her to be in the smaller room because it was a bit more of a throughfare of people. That was how you got into the kennel room. So
Oh,
that
so
was
then
a
it's
little bit,
constant people walking by and
and
it's
it
a
was
little
just,
bit
she
yeah.
could not settle. Like, it was just rough for her. She is a very sociable dog, and she has so much love. And so for her to have people coming through, she was like, "Oh, friend, 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 people," like, and it was I think for her very, like, mentally difficult to just relax.
Yeah.
And
Now
it
she
didn't
could she
really.
be off could she be off her leash if you had her in one of
The
those rooms
first
or
so
not
yeah,
really the one with
in
the
that in the bigger room that was just, it had one entrance and exit, there was times in at the beginning of the cruise when we as other owners had kind of got to know each other and said, "Hey, do you wanna let the dogs off? There's only a couple of them here." And we did, but the kennel masters were not super keen on that. I think they explained it as, like, we have had incidents in the past, and, and there's, I think, when dogs don't know each other, or when obviously the kennel masters don't know us either, and there can be a very fine line between play fighting that, could turn into something else. The dogs are all in a different environment, and they just said, we would feel more comfortable if you left the leads on the dogs. So we did. We respected that. If we'd been obviously told that from the very beginning, we never would have let them off lead. But that was a little agreement on that day, and it was really nice. And it was a bit sad that they didn't want us to do it, because there was one dog that Ruby was playing with in particular. They had so much fun, and they were the two highest energy dogs, and it really helped them that day. But you obviously have to be respectful of the rules. So yeah, so we would, spend time with her that morning, and then we actually embraced the let's say older demographic of the ship, and we committed ourselves to bridge lessons. It's something that James and I have always wanted. Like, we love card games, and obviously, like, yeah, bridge is like the card game, like, of strategy and skill. And we've never learned to play. We've tried to look online, but it's hard.
it's really hard. I know the basics of bridge, but I don't know there's, like, signaling things that you do. Do you signal to your partner? And I don't know any of that part. I just know the mechanics of how to play the game. I don't know the strategy of, like, the signaling stuff, but I have a friend of mine who I used to work with who she's a little bit older, but not not the typical bridge age, and she goes to, like, bridge tournaments, like, she's, like, hardcore, knows all the things, but, like, it's a really good game of strategy if you like card games. It's just I think you're right, it's harder to
You
learn,
need
you've
to
gotta
be
really
taught. Yeah,
yeah.
you 100, and we still do not know all of it. Like, we did 5 days of lessons, and the bridge instructor was a guy called Keith, and he was great. He really explained it. They were, it was 1 hour lessons. I think that was about all your brain could take of the kind of what was being taught. We committed to it for the 5 days, but he was staying on until Sydney, I believe. And he kind of said, if you're here and you want to continue, I have developed a kind of end to end all the way through to Sydney to keep progressing and get you playing. But that first week was just about learning like the basics. So we did commit to that. So we would go see Ruby for the hour in the morning, go down to our bridge lesson for an hour, and then come back and sit with her till lunch. And it did take until day 3 or 4 for her to actually lay down next to us and settle in that room. I think it was just really hard for her. And we figured out that if we got her little blanket out, put it out, she started to get the message that she could lay down and sleep. And the first day that she laid down and shut her eyes, it was 10 minutes to 12. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to wake you up in 10 minutes. And I was so devastated because she'd finally just gone, okay. But she got better over the next few days. So that was okay. So yeah, so then we would have kind of 12 till 3, we'd get some lunch, we'd go to the gym, like have a little bit of downtime for ourselves. And then at 3 o'clock, go straight back, pretty much stay there until about 5:30 when we ran like headless chickens to and they would give the dogs dinner around 5:30. So we would let Ruby have her dinner, and then we would put her back in her kennel and then run like headless chickens to get dressed to go to dinner. We figured out very, very quickly after the first night pretty much that our assigned dining time was not working for us with the kennel schedule. So like Disney, Cunard have two assigned dining times. But the one thing that was super irritating was instead of having the main stage performances flipped the way that Disney do, so you do one then the other, whichever way around you do it. Cunard, they just shift it later. So the second main stage performance was 10 o'clock at night, 10:15 at night. I was so tired. Like, I could not make it that far. I tried so hard. Because there were certain things I'd like to go to, but we also could not make the earlier time for the earlier time of show was difficult with our dinner and Ruby and all that stuff. So what they do offer, which I would highly recommend if you do a Cunard cruise, just because their timetabling isn't as organized in the same kind of like helpful way as Disney, is they have open dining from 6 till 9. So if you're on open dining, you just show up, or you can book your place in a virtual line if you don't want to wait in the line. But to be honest, if you show up at 6 p.m., you were just going to walk straight in, and that is what we did. We worked out that was just going to fit a lot better for us. That enabled us to sit down, eat, and then get back to Ruby for 7:30 when we could get her out on the deck and run around with her. And basically we would then stay there until 8:30. And then if we had the energy, we would go and do something after that. But some nights we just went to bed.
Well, and that I mean, that's fast, like, you're I mean, you can't have a leisurely dinner, because you're like you said, you're gonna if it's, like, 5:30, you're getting dressed for dinner real quick, so let's say you even make it to dinner by 6, you gotta be out of there by, like, 7:15 in order to get to Ruby at 7:30, right? So, like, you're not this is not like a leisurely paced yeah, which I totally understand because you can't if you hadn't gone to see Ruby during these times, like, that means your dog is in a small kennel for the entire day, and so, like, just to put it out there for people listening, like, your animals can be in a kennel for a long period of the day, like, I mean, our dogs are in their kennel when we're out of the house at work, but we have somebody who comes and walks them in the middle of the day, right? And then when we're home, they're not in their kennels all day, right? Like, that's so, yeah, it's just you're poor, and the dog is having to adjust to a completely different environment too, so there's all of
Yeah,
that.
and doggy seasickness is a real thing. It's, I think bless her little heart, Ruby was the only one that did not get sick. And to avoid grossing people out, doggy seasickness tends to present in the opposite direction to human seasickness. So that, and some dogs, bless their little hearts, they were having a rough time of it. I think there were a few dogs on that cruise that were literally on a diet of boiled chicken and rice because they were just feeling so sorry for themselves and so unwell. Thankfully, I've got a resilient little one who just took it all in her stride and didn't seem that bothered, apart from just, I think, being very overtired and wishing she could run around.
Well, maybe not the best segue in the world, but speaking of food, I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I missed this when you were describing some of the spaces on the ship, but was there really only the main dining room that you were assigned to eat in, or did you try some of the other food on board? And I'm kind of curious
There
what
are
you thought
some
of the food overall.
paid options. So, kind of in the Remy Paolo type vein, there were some paid options, which I believe ranged from in the sort of $35 a head to maybe $65 to $70 a head, just because of our schedule of like wanting to sit down and enjoy the food. We chose not to do that. But something that I did think was really interesting, they had kind of a rotational style of those restaurants where for the first 3 or 4 days, one of them was called Bamboo. And it was an Asian fusion type thing. It was actually in one of the spaces that was the buffet, part of the buffet during breakfast and lunch. And then in the evening, it was a paid restaurant. For the second half of the cruise, it was, I forget the name, but it turned into an Italian and they did pasta and pizza. So they changed it up a little bit to kind of, I guess, give you something else to come back to and try something a little bit different. There was also the Veranda Steakhouse, which some of the other owners that we made friends with, they went to and said was brilliant. And then there was also, I can't remember if it was during the evening as well, but certainly during lunchtime, you could get burgers and hot dogs, like specialty burgers and hot dogs, like freshly made it was called the Chef's Galley. So it was right next to the buffet. It was practically attached to it, but you could go up and order from a menu of I want the, you know, whatever different type of burger. Like they had all sorts of different kind of things with different toppings, and they had like bratwurst sausages or like foot long hot dogs or with all toppings and kind of country themed and things like that, with fries and things that were all then very freshly made, right? They're ready for you.
Yeah,
So
and
that was
was
kind
that
of nice.
included, or was that an
That was
add-on?
included. Yeah, that
Okay.
one was included. So that was nice. There was one couple of days that we went and got burgers because the buffet food just did not appeal. Like some days the buffet was amazing and other days it felt a little bit flat for us. But we never made it to a sit down breakfast for timing reasons. It didn't open till 8. We're already with the dog. And we we did buffet breakfast every day, which was nice. Similar to Disney, you could get an omelet made. You could one thing that was actually really nice there, they did poached eggs. I say fresh, but in that warmed up way of they're kind of like part poached and they'll warm them up, but they were runny in the middle, and that's what matters. So that was actually kind of a really nice thing on the buffet, that because the fried eggs on a buffet are never good, let's be honest here.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. They've just kind of been
yeah,
sitting there.
so
Yeah.
that we found the ways to kind of make it as kind of nice as nice as we could make it for what we could fit in with our time.
How did the food quality compare to Disney? Was it better?
No,
Wow.
I don't think so. There were some days in the main dining room that were better, and there were other days that I felt were a bit of a bust. And there was a couple of nights in the main dining room where I left and went, I didn't really enjoy that. I will say on the gala night, which was one of the 2 formal nights that we had, they did Beef Wellington, and that I did really like. They did that very well, considering they make, well, we actually paid to do the behind the scenes tour, which was awesome. And I can talk more about that in a second. But they did tell us when we were in the kitchens, because it was the day before this gala night, he said, yep, we start with 700 portions of beef Wellington and see how we go. So to be making beef Wellington on that scale and to do it, it was delicious. So yeah, they certainly did a lot of things very well, but there were some nights in the main dining room where it was just a bit meh. And the thing I wished that they had available somewhere was some way to see the menu before you got in there, because it's not available anywhere. I'm sure if you walked in and asked for it at the start of dinner, they'd hand it to you, but it's kind of a bit late at that point because you're already dressed or you're not.
Right,
It's
because you
not like
could decide,
Disney
"Oh, I'm gonna
opens
go to the
stores like
buffet."
that and, look at this, that, and they don't have any of that. So yeah, and I would estimate the kind of average age on this ship was probably 65 to 70. So the technology side of things is probably less of a priority for them. And people probably are very happy to just come and sit down and have their 3 or 4 course meal. But I guess we are used to being able to kind of look in advance. Disney spoil us with that, and we kind of know, we know, like, oh, it's this night, I know that I like this, or I can at least look ahead and see that there's things I want. Whereas I think there were certain nights where we left and said, oh, I think I could have just had the buffet for dinner. Like, that wasn't worth sitting there for like an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half.
How is the service on board generally as compared to Disney? My sense has been that Cunard is supposed to offer a very high level of service, but what was your experience?
I am sorry to say that was the thing that James and I both commented on that we really felt was lacking. And I'll tell you why I think it was lacking. They put gratuities on in the same way that Disney do a daily auto gratuity. For the first time ever, I have never done this on Disney. I removed our gratuities. And I'll tell you why I did that. Because they are just distributed to the crew. They're not for your particular assigned service team. You only have an assigned service team if you have an assigned dining time. And even then, we did have an assigned dining time on the first night, which didn't work, and we swapped to open dining. Unfortunately, our server didn't even introduce himself to us. He didn't introduce himself. It was kind of lackluster. Like, I had to keep asking for more water. It just, there was one night where my husband ordered some wine and it showed up when dessert showed up. And it felt very kind of lackluster, and like people didn't care all that much. Our stateroom host was wonderful. Like, he was great. Jerry was brilliant. Like, but it's not on the same level of Disney. Like, you almost wanted to have we tried to have a conversation a couple of times and kind of ask about him. And it was kind of quick, short, one word answers, like, I'm getting back to my job. And it was certainly, if you're used to Disney service, you will notice the difference. What we chose to do was remove the gratuities that just got kind of mass blanketed out to everybody. And we chose to give cash to particular staff members instead. So the kennel masters, obviously, they did a lot of, they took great care of Ruby. Our stateroom host, when we went to bars and restaurants, if we had a paid tab that we could write some additional tip on, we did. They had the obvious, I think it was 15% additional. Disney had the 18. So that's already on there. We, did our extra kind of couple of dollars here and there. But yeah, it just wasn't, unfortunately, it just wasn't the same. And this could be us coming from the level of service that Disney provide is so high and so personalized that we have those expectations. And actually, this is more normal for maybe for the cruise industry. Because this is the first time I've cruised on Disney. So I don't have another benchmark.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on the ships that we have sailed on, while I would say the service hasn't been as good as Disney, we have received some really good service, in particular on Virgin, we've gotten some really good service, although it's spotty, and it's certain places really, really good and other places a little bit lackluster. And then same with Royal, it's a little more spotty, but I think that the difference for us has been sort of there's a level of friendliness on Disney that that the crew, like, even you mentioned about your stateroom attendant, like, your stateroom attendant was nice and did a great job, but, like, wasn't overly friendly when you tried to engage in conversation. I think that's the difference. I think Disney, like, encourages their crew to be friendly. I think it's sort of like the Disney brand, right, is a friendly, open brand, and so I think they just kind of in their training, they must sort of encourage that level of friendliness and that level of getting to know you, between the
And I don't know
passengers
if that's a
and the crew.
demographic thing with Cunard as well. Like, certainly we stuck out. Like, my husband and I are in our early 30s. Like, we were certainly some of the youngest on the ship. And if it almost like I went to some of the like I'm a big crafter, like I love to crochet and cross stitch, and they had a daily 3 o'clock like just bring your own project, come and sit down kind of setup thing. So I was like, I'll go along. Like James would go up and walk Ruby, and I would do that, and then we would switch, and he would go off and like have a little bit of free time some days. And I remember sitting down on like the second day, and this woman looked at me and went, oh, a young person. Like I was this like enigma. And so
You're like a unicorn.
yeah, and I think a lot of almost everybody else that we saw that is quote unquote a young person comparative to the rest of the typical demographic of the ship was a lot of them had dogs in the kennels. There was definitely you could pick each other out. And it was, oh, I was talking to this other young couple who have their dog when you got talking to people. So I don't know if that's a demographic thing with the crew of like actually does Cunard's typical demographic not want to have a conversation in their stateroom? They want you to come in and turn the bed down and clean up and be out of their way. I don't know. Maybe, but it was honestly, we had one server when we sat down for dinner one night, he introduced himself. We had a conversation with him, and I was like, oh my God, this is so nice. Like, and we actually, when we stood up to leave, we walked over to him and said, thank you so much for serving us this evening. We really enjoyed having you as our server. And it made such a difference. It really
It does.
did.
I think it changes the experience. I mean, we've had, some more, friend even on Disney, like friendly servers and less friendly servers, and it makes a very big difference. And honestly, as a passenger, even if things are sort of not, if the service isn't perfect, friendliness goes a long way to actually make me feel better about the service, even if the service was slow or they forgot to refill the water glass or something like that. It's interesting. One question we didn't ask you, you talked about demographic age-wise for the passengers, but I'm curious about nationality. Were they mostly, Brits on board, or was it more
Heavily,
international?
heavily British, yeah.
Yeah.
So we actually went to what was actually very nice was how Disney have like the gold and platinum receptions, and sometimes those are a drinks reception, and sometimes it's a come to the theater and have the backstage look at this, that, and the other. They did a first time cruisers reception, and I believe they do that for their various levels of loyalty, because we heard about other people going to, oh, I went to I don't remember the name of the status, but whatever, reception tonight. And we got invited to the first time cruisers reception. And what was really nice is the captain came and he stood up, and he was a brilliant speaker. Really, really nice to hear from him. And it was actually his last cruise as captain of the ship, because he is moving on to be a fleet captain. So it was I think he said it was his 152nd time sailing into New York with that ship, which I just thought was really cool. But so he came and spoke, and they did go through and say, like, oh, we have this many people from this country and this many people. And I think out of the 2,700, roughly 50% were from England / the UK. And then he even said, and we have 13 dogs and 2 cats. Like, so, they were obviously very well aware of all of that, which was nice.
Laura, what have we missed about your sailing? And then I have one last question for you.
The behind the scenes tour, I haven't told you about. So we actually, this was a pay to do tour. I believe it was $125 each for about a 3.5 hour tour of various areas of the ship, including the bridge, which was the big draw for me, because that's just something I love cruising, and I find all the behind the scenes stuff so interesting. And Disney they offer like kind of, you have the videos in the stateroom, and they might do a presentation here and there on the longer cruises, but you don't ever actually get to see it for real. So it was really cool.
Yeah,
Like,
they've
and I'm
done some of
one.
that in the past. They have done some of that in the past, and we also heard of people getting invited to the bridge for some special thing if it's like their 100th cruise or something like that, but it's just not you
Not something
can't.
you can just sign up to do.
No, and a lot of other cruise lines allow you to. Royal allows you they have one, it's a couple hours long where you can do and Brian's done it, like, tour of the ship where you get to see, like you might see the engine room, you might see the bridge, you see the kitchens, right? Like, all of that stuff is really cool.
Yeah, so that's basically what we got. So the first place they took us was we went into the backstage of the theater, and they had a technical stage manager show us all the bits of the theater. And their theater, I actually did really like the theater on this ship. It had a projection stage, which he kind of jokingly said he was like singers and comedians absolutely love it. The magicians hate it because they can't do the kind of proper sleight of hand that they can do with the kind of flat front stage. But the seats in this theater were so nice and so comfortable. Also, that was what I think contributed to when I tried to go to the 10:15. I think it was a piano show that, like, there was a pianist, a concert pianist that was there, and I was there just like, it was so warm, and I was falling asleep because the
And the
seat was
seats are
so
so
comfortable,
comfortable.
and I was so tired. And I was like, no, stay awake, Laura. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
a good theater actually needs to the seats need to not be so comfortable that you'll fall asleep. They need to be cut like, there's, like, a level of comfort and depth, right? Like, they can't be they have to be just comfortable enough that you can sit for 3 hours, but not comfortable enough that you're gonna take a nap.
yeah. And then we went to the other side of the backstage, and they had some of the performers show us costumes and kind of talk about quick changes and things like that. They took us to the bridge, to the engine room, to the kitchens, to kind of the main crew walkway. We went to the medical center and met the doctor, and he showed us all of their different kind of setups and stuff. And it was really interesting. Like, they kind of have everything from a kind of regular patient room where, it's very kind of low level care, to like the super critical, kind of looks almost trauma center like, and got to ask all sorts of questions. And that was really interesting. And somebody actually did ask, like, is there a vet, like, you have dogs? And he was like, no, there is no vet. And I kind of went, yeah, our dog's on board, you kind of sign your life away in that respect of. But he did kind of explain that if, a lot of the medications for animals are very similar to humans, and if we needed to contact a veterinarian to get advice, we have a full pharmacy on board. Like, we couldn't, perform surgery or do anything like that, but there's probably a lot of things that minor things that we could assist with if we needed to.
Right, like, if your dog got, like, a wound, like a they could bandage him up, right.
Yeah, he would speak to a veterinarian on land, find out the appropriate thing that he needed to do, and he was like, we would do our best that we could do, of course. And he was actually telling us all about kind of the point in the cruise where, we could get we're this far away and we would need to get a helicopter, or we're that far away that actually there's no options, so we would have to just put our foot down and go towards land as fast as possible. And it was really interesting to hear about all of the things that the doctors are considering on a given day of a cruise, of what they need to be aware of what changes when, like, Transatlantic is so different. If we're in the Caribbean, we're never really that far from anywhere. Like, it's not that much of an issue. But he said the thought process is so different on a Transatlantic. And he did tell us that his very first day on the job, he had to call the captain in the middle of the night on 2 separate occasions for 2 very sick passengers. So yeah, it was, yeah, he was like, I could not believe it was my first day on the job and I had to wake the captain twice.
So, Laura, I want to ask the ultimate question here, which is, would you sail Cunard again, or are you headed back into the warm embrace of Mickey here?
If we did move back to England and Ruby needed to move, I would not hesitate to move her with Cunard again. I certainly think for our family, choosing a ship over a flight. And we actually, between the kind of other owners, there were some people that had flown their dogs in the past to either get to England or for other reasons. And we had a long debate over the 8 hours of stress of a flight or the 8 days of managing stress on a ship. And I think for Ruby, it was definitely the right choice, and it's definitely a choice that we would make again if that was the route that we needed to go. Would I necessarily choose Cunard over Disney personally? No.
Yeah, for like a pleasure sailing without Ruby, right?
For a sailing of pure enjoyment, I just think that I am not the right demographic that they are aiming at. And I did feel out of place. Let me kind of put it that way. But having said that, in future life, if I was looking at, say, a world cruise or that, like, it's not that I would not consider it ever again. I just don't think that it would be the right kind of vacation for us, if I were to put it that way. I love Disney. I'm definitely like, I would still love to try Virgin. I would love to try Carnival at other lines and kind of get a bit more of a sense of what else is out there. It's not put me off other lines entirely. I think I definitely recognize that the level of service that Disney provide, we love. And that friendliness and that personability makes such a difference. And I think I have underestimated that.
Interesting. I love that. All right. Well, I'm going to jump in and ask the final question. Since we've done rapid fire with you, we're not going to do rapid fire in today's show. But the final question is, what's next? Do you have something booked with Disney? I know you just moved to the States. Your husband is actually still in. Your husband flew back to the UK because he's finishing up a couple more months of work in the UK. But you're now in the States. Do you have a Disney cruise booked in the future? Now you don't have to, you don't have to even look at those, sailings out of Europe. You can just focus on, sailings on the eastern seaboard of the United States. So, yeah, do you have something booked for when
We
after he's,
do not
in the
we do
States?
not have a booking, but there is a plan. So, actually, what my husband and I are intending to do is, starting at some point in this summer, we are going to buy an RV, and travel the continental 48. So, with the idea is to have remote jobs, live on the road, explore the country with a view to kind of figuring out where we want to live long term. We've done a lot of New England and obviously Florida. I have also spent an extended period of time in Texas, but there's a whole lot of this country that we've never seen. We don't think we'd like to drive the continental 48, but next year we are planning to do Alaska. It has been our bucket list cruise for the longest time. We have been putting money aside for it for the longest time. I am really, really hoping that we can figure out scraping enough things together. It really depends on the jobs that we end up with and how things work out, but very, very much hoping to be able to do it what I call properly in concierge, because from listening to you guys for so long, it's do it right. So I really, really hope that that's something that we can do. It's definitely where we want to do our next cruise. I would also love to hop back on another Southern Caribbean. We did that in November a couple of years ago, and it was just the greatest thing. I loved that itinerary at that time of year. So, but I think that's what's really nice is I feel like historically we've really had to plan, because we needed, for most of the cruises that we've done, we have to fly internationally and get here a few days before and all that sort of stuff. And it's a much kind of bigger operation than potentially kind of a domestic flight to, Florida or wherever. So I'm hoping that we can be a little bit more spontaneous with cruising now.
I love it. I love it. Well, listen, Alaska is incredible. Obviously, a bucket list. Whether you sail in concierge or in regular or in steerage, like in Cunard,
I
it
don't think
is.
Disney really has steerage.
No,
Let's be
there's no
honest
steerage. Yeah,
here.
there's no steerage on Disney. I agree, but no, regardless of how you do it, Alaska is incredible. Highly recommend. Of course, Laura, you're always welcome back on our show. And of course, if you end up in the Seattle area, you gotta give us a ring and we'll
We
come and meet
absolutely
you.
will. We definitely will be. Yeah, we are kind of route planning and figuring out where we want to be at different parts of the year to kind of chase the weather. Yeah, I have the last kind of couple of weeks, we're in New Hampshire at the moment, which is where all of my mum's family are, and this is some cold that I have never experienced. Yeah, I don't mind it. It's not the kind of cold that I want to spend too much of my life in. And Ruby, I think the novelty of the snow has already worn off, so I think we do need to find somewhere a little warmer to live and chase the weather in the RV for a bit.
Well, awesome. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming back on the show. This has been a fabulous experience just hearing about Cunard, hearing all about moving Ruby across the Atlantic Ocean. Sounds like it was honestly a really smart way of travel, even though maybe not the perfect vacation for you and your husband. But yeah, just thanks for coming on again.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.